buying a home is already a pretty daunting experience, especially for first-time home buyers. You want to make sure you're getting a good deal, and you want to make sure that nothing unexpected ends up happening. So today I want to go over the top 10,000 questions to ask when you're buying a home. Okay, just kidding, not necessarily 10,000, but I am going to give my top 8 that I think are the most important, not only in terms of getting the best deal, but also making sure that you're not necessarily going to have anything unexpected that you didn't necessarily foresee happening. And in general, these are going to be questions that focus more on questions to ask the seller or ask a seller through a realtor, not necessarily a mortgage officer or questions that you would ask them. And some of these questions you can actually answer yourself by being proactive. And here's a little bit of a pro tip for you. Make sure that you get all of these answers in writing, because not only will you have it as proof if you ever have to rely on it and you can actually reference something, but if you're like me, you end up forgetting things here and now. So if you have something like an email to reference, it makes it a lot easier to remember. Speaking of almost forgetting, here's your interesting house fact for the day. In Scotland, they actually paint their door red once their mortgage is paid off. I wonder if anybody had to repaint their door because they ended up refinancing their mortgage. Anyways, if you found that fact interesting, please hit that like button for me. And now let's get into some of the top questions to ask when purchasing a home. So probably one of the most important questions to know is, what is the sales history of your home? And you'd be fairly surprised on how many people don't know the full history of their home. A lot of people end up just focusing on how long the home has actually been on the market. And while it certainly is true that the longer a home is on the market, the more likely it is to be overpriced and you can negotiate a better deal, there's a lot of value in knowing the full history of your home. For example, if you really care about maintaining the purchase price of your home, let's say that over the past 20 years, the house has continuously sold around $200,000, then there's a really good likelihood that when you buy the house for $200,000, that you're probably going to end up selling it for around $200,000 as well. So if stability in your price is something you really care about, then that would be a good scenario. But let's say in a different scenario, you end up having the situation where this home sold 20 years ago for $150,000 and then went up in value to, let's say, $250,000, but then it went back down in value just, a couple of years ago to $200,000. So there's a lot of price fluctuations given the history of this house. So while that means you end up being more vulnerable in terms of price fluctuations, that also means you have opportunity to be made as far as having that upside potential of appreciating your home value. Another scenario where you would gain valuable insight on learning the sales history of your home would be something like, over the past 3 years, the home has been bought and resold 7 or 8 times. That would kind of indicate that something may be inherently wrong with the property, or that there's a reason why people aren't living there too long. That may not necessarily always be the case, but it is helpful to know these things, as well as if the house has been foreclosed on or not. And it may be even helpful to know the original sales price that the home was originally sold at the first time, because imagine buying a house for $100,000 only to find out that when it was first built, it sold for $200,000. You'd be a little bit skeptical if that's a good investment or not. Now, somewhat related to the sales price history of your home is understanding why somebody is selling the home. Now, I will say that there is value in understanding why a seller is selling their home, but I will say that this question ranks lower on my list than maybe, other people may rank it. And that's because I think it's just a little too easy for people to just make up a story on why they're moving. But there is a good chance that you can end up learning something that may not necessarily have been so obvious. Perhaps they had some kind of dispute with their neighbor and that's why they're moving. And if they admit that, then maybe that indicates that the neighbor's a bad neighbor and that's a house you want to stay away from. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can actually end up getting a great deal because you find out that a seller is leaving their home for good reason, but it's causing a lot of other people to stay away. Let's say, for example, somebody recently purchased a home and then just 3 months later, they're deciding to sell it. Most people are going to be pretty resistant to buying that home and be pretty skeptical. So then you may have better leverage as far as your negotiating power because people are staying away from it. But you end up talking to the person and realize that they're moving because, let's say, they can no longer afford the payment because they lost their job, or perhaps they got divorced and they have to sell the home. Or maybe you learn that the person is an investor and they're trying to flip the house and that's why they're selling it. In that case, look up that person's reputation, because if they have a poor reputation, you don't want to be moving into a home that starts to fall apart, a year or two down the road. It's certainly true, though, that people could tell you to mind your own business when you ask people why they're selling a home. But that's kind of the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is you actually learn insightful information. Now, the next important question to ask is, what is actually included in the sale of the home and property? For the most part, you can generally assume that anything that's attached to the home is included in that sale, and anything that's not attached is not going to be included. But some people are surprised to find out that the previous owner took the washer and dryer, or perhaps they've just recently purchased a new fridge and there's no way that they're going to let the new owner take ownership of the fridge. The reverse could actually be true as well. Maybe there's an old refrigerator that's sitting in the garage that doesn't really work too well, but it's sitting there, and you're expecting that the previous owner is going to take that with them or or at least dispose of it, you don't want to necessarily get stuck with that. Or maybe there's a shed in the backyard that you want to make sure that the previous owner disposes of. Those are things you're going to have to make sure are there in writing. Now, probably equally as important as to what is being included in the sale of the home is whether or not a warranty is included. For example, imagine an AC unit having a transferable warranty that's beneficial to you, but if it's not transferable, or maybe the warranty's already expired, then if that AC has to have a major repair, that's going to be out of your pocket. And to go a little bit further, what type of warranty or what's included in the warranty is equally important. There's warranties out there that will cover the parts and replacement of, let's say a refrigerator, but it doesn't necessarily include the labor. So when it comes to something like plumbing, the labor can be a huge part of the actual replacement cost. So you're going to want to make sure that you understand fully what the warranty covers. And make sure you have all the information that is necessary to validate that warranty. Sometimes it's not just enough to have the serial number of a water heater. You actually have to know who serviced that water heater in the first place. Maybe it's a local company. Make sure you're aware of what that phone number or what the business contact information is to validate that warranty. Speaking of major repairs, the next question you're going to want to have answered is how old is the roof, or for that matter, just how old any of the major appliances are. And that would include things like water heater, HVAC, refrigerator, washer and dryer. There's so many different major appliances that can end up costing thousands of dollars. So you're going to want to make sure you know the age for that. And even just knowing the age of these things not only allows you to kind of budget for it once you actually purchase a home, but it also gives you a huge leveraging advantage when you actually go to the negotiation process. And speaking of which, the other thing you're going to want to, especially when it comes to the roof or even any kind of major repair like HVAC or water heater, you not only want to make sure that, let's say it was replaced within a year, you want to make sure it was done by a reputable company, because there's a lot of people out there that if I'm going to replace the roof and I know I'm going to sell the house 2 years down the road, but I have to replace it now because there's a major leak, I'm probably not going to pay for a premium service. I'm probably going to go with, just a general contractor that may not be too reputable, and that's going to end up being your problem. Now, the next general question you're going to want to have answered is what's the average utilities for the place you're looking at? You could have two very identical homes in terms of square footage and property size, but because one is situated a little bit differently towards the sun, or perhaps one property has a few more trees, or the trees are just situated just the right way, you can have significantly different electrical or gas bills. And you really want to make sure you have a good sense of this, because it comes into play when you're thinking about how much house you can afford. Because when you add up the trash bill, the gas bill, the water bill, all the internet bill, there's so many different things that end up kind of contributing to this monthly cost that you want to make sure you are at least aware of what that's going to be. And if you want to be less intrusive when asking this information from the seller, you can just kind of ask it in terms of usage and not necessarily dollar amount, because I know sometimes people get uncomfortable talking about that. So if they tell you and provide that they use on average 5,000 gallons of water per month, then you can just go ahead and look up what's the average rate per gallon of water in that local area. And then that can, you calculate that. And now you have that information without them actually providing directly how much they spend per month. Now, these next two questions, I can't stress enough that's really critical on understanding how to ask it. So basically, just think of it this way. If I ask you, is there anything wrong with the house? It's very easy for you to kind of have this easy out and say, no, there's nothing wrong. But if I phrase it in a different way and say, can you let me know what things are wrong with the house? It ends up kind of prompting you to start divulging information that you may not have otherwise. So the first general question that I would use this technique with would be something like, what major repairs have been done, or even minor repairs have been done over the past 5 years? If I ask it in a different way and say, have there been any significant repairs over the past 5 years? The seller's just going to say no. But if I ask it in this positive assumption way, then it allows them to kind of divulge that information in a more comfortable manner, because I've already assumed that there's been major repairs. And even more so than that, once they divulge that information and say, well, I have had to replace the sink or the faucet or the shower head or whatever that repair ends up being, you really need to make sure you go down to that repair, have them show you it, or maybe their realtor or your realtor show you that repair and make sure it's done properly. It doesn't do you very much good for somebody to say, well, I had to repair a wall, and you don't necessarily know which wall that is, or you don't necessarily negotiate that as part of your price. If you're not going to use this information, then why ask it? So you really want to make sure if you're going to be asking about something, you're either investigating it and verifying it, or you're using it as part of your negotiation process. The second question you're going to want to use the same technique would be asking about neighbors. Don't necessarily just ask, do you have any bad neighbors, or are the neighbors great? That's too easy of an out to basically give an easy response, a yes or no to. What you want them to do is basically explain what are the habits of the neighbors. Ask, do the neighbors typically park in the street, or they park in their driveway? Do they, well maintain their lawn, or do they not? Those are questions that basically force them to give more detail rather than just a simple yes or no. And then if it's possible, verify this information yourself. If they're saying that, nobody in the neighborhood owns any pets, or that the pet owners that are there, they always keep them leashed or in their yard, verify that. Check out the neighborhood at some other later point. Or if they're saying something along the lines of none of the neighbors have large parties at night or anything like that, then come at night and maybe you see that one of the neighbors is having the world's largest party. And if they are having the world's largest party, you want to be worried, not necessarily because that could be your potential neighbor, but why didn't you get invited to the world's largest party? Okay, jokes aside, to kind of wrap this video up, there are a few bonus questions I'm just going to throw in here just for you to consider, but it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. Things like, what is a school zone like? That's another example where you want to ask in a way that doesn't give them an easy out. Don't just ask about, is the school district great? You want to make sure that they kind of describe the school district to you, or you talk to people about the school district. Are there kids in the neighborhood that your kids could play with? Let's assuming you have kids. Or, maybe you're interested in buying a particular house because you want to do some type of major renovation or change the exterior of the house. You want to make sure that this is a neighborhood that allows that. So have those questions answered. So that completes my list as far as questions that you want to have answered when buying your first home, or any home for that matter. And like I said, in general, you really want to make sure you verify the information that's been given to you. And on top of that, that you actually use this information. Don't just get the answers and then move on. Either use it as part of your negotiation process, or actually act on those different questions that you're getting, or those different answers that you're getting for your questions. If you appreciate this video, please give this video a like. I'd appreciate it a lot. And if you like home buying or first time home buyer type videos, those are videos I really enjoy doing. So let me know down below if you appreciate it. And if you like personal finance or any of those general topics, hit that subscribe button. I hope to see you in the next one.